Alright, so according to YouTube, I'm supposed to be live. This is the first time I'm doing this, so I have no idea if I'm actually live or if I'm talking to a wall. I hope I'm not talking to a wall. Hopefully somebody's gonna tell me if I'm talking to a wall. That would be awkward. Alright, welcome to Information Security Lecture 9, Networking 1, the first of the networking lectures. Hi, I'm neither Maria nor Daniel, as you'll have noticed. I'm Jacob. I'm going to be doing the next 4 lectures with you guys. Yeah, so this is my home office lecture hall. It's not as fancy as Maria's, sadly. You won't see me pointing at stuff on the slides. I'm not that cool. Hopefully we can make it work. Hopefully audio quality is fine as well. I tried it earlier, it was audible. Okay, so turn this on. Turn this on and then shouldn't theory work? It works if you change it to the red thing. Okay, so as you will have noticed that was quick. Some of you are quick. As you will have noticed in the YouTube description and in the Discord announcement, there is a Mentimeter link again today, and we are going to give that a try because I want to find out what you guys think is going to happen in the next 4 lectures. This is partially because I kind of want to gauge what people are expecting from this lecture, but also because I kind of I'm looking to you for ideas, because I've got stuff to do for the first 3 lectures, and I have like an idea of what I want to do for the 4th, but I have flexibility. So if there's any subject in the rough sphere of network security that you are interested in and you think might fit in the 4th lecture, bring it up and maybe I'll see if I can include it. So yeah, you should be able to open Menti on your phone and add some stuff. Oh, that was good. Right, so we are seeing stuff. Well, you guys are seeing stuff. I'm only seeing it on my phone. Alright, so what do we have? Network attacks. Yeah, okay, that's a good one. HTTPS. Yes, we are going to talk about HTTPS today. Maria told me that you guys were unsatisfied by her explanation, and we are going to be talking about certificates today, if we have the time. Man-in-the-middle attacks. Yes. Major net data collection. We're going to mention it. HTTP 3. Maybe. What else do we have? VPNs. Sure, we can talk about that. Web security, yes, that is next week's lecture. Nmap and port scanning, yep. TCP, yep, that's today. Yeah, okay, I think I got all the big ones. Okay, so yeah. A lot of stuff on there and a lot of stuff we're going to be talking about. Let's move to the next one. So, some ground rules. We're going to be talking about various technologies in this lecture. And some of these are technologies that you should be using because they're good. Some of these are technologies that you probably shouldn't be using because they're generally, well, I don't want to say bad because that sounds judgmental, but there's better alternatives. So outdated hash functions, outdated security standards from the 1980s, weak cryptography backdoored by the NSA, that kind of stuff. Probably shouldn't be using that. So we're going to be coloring algorithms and technologies for your convenience. If you're just looking through the slides and want like a super quick glance of I should be using this, I shouldn't be using this, or at least I should think seriously before I use this, the coloring is for you. If it's colored in green, it's generally fine. If it's colored in red, think like 3 times before you use it. It's a quick and dirty categorization in like binary categories. It's going to miss a lot of nuance, but yeah, I mean, if you want to know why it is this way, pay attention to the rest of the lecture. That's what we're here for. Okay, so we're going to be talking about security. You're going to have met some of these players before. So we're going to be talking about security, and when we're talking about security, we often talk about it from this slightly game theoretical sense. we have players, and the players have roles to play. So they have roles to play, and they're typically opposed to each other. So in this context, we're going to be using these four players. Alice and Bob, you're going to have met these two, I'm assuming, if you've ever attended any lecture on security. Alice and Bob are our goody two-shoes users. They just want to communicate in peace and be left alone. And then we have two attackers that we're going to be using for this lecture. First one's Eve. The eavesdropper, is just a malicious entity. Doesn't have any particular powers or privileges, just an attacker that is a malicious entity that has a computer and is skilled in computing. And then we have a second attacker in this case, which is going to be relevant in some context. The second attacker, I call her Smith, because calling somebody Agent Smith is funny in a lecture, I'm being told. And she has the power of law enforcement. Law enforcement is very scary in computing. Why? Because law enforcement sometimes just doesn't need to break your cryptography. You see, your 4096-bit RSA is probably not going to do you any good when law enforcement shows up at your door with a warrant and says, unlock this or go to jail. Sad truth. So these are our two interlopers that we're going to be dealing with in this lecture. We're going to meet them. So, yeah. Moving on. We're talking about networking, so we're going to need some background. Oh yeah, quick note, of course. You guys should be familiar with this from the last few lectures, but if you have questions during the lecture, the Mentimeter Q&A function should be enabled. So you should be able to just pop a question in there, and it should show up on my phone, in theory, and I should be able to get to it when it's appropriate. Okay, so we're going to need some background. For background, we're going to go to... yeah, okay. So we have a first question. I'm going to go at this really quickly. Yeah, going to jail is better than giving law enforcement the password of my hard drive encryption, is what this says. That depends on what's in your hard drive. So, yeah. This is a good point. And like, I'm not a legal expert, so I'm not going to give you legal advice on what the law is on forced decryption in Austria, because I'm actually not 100% sure if that's actually ever been like adjudicated in Austria specifically. It's mainly also an issue. So it's true that it's probably a more interesting question for you personally, because you personally are invested in your data. It's less of an issue if law enforcement shows up at your ISP with a warrant, because your ISP has very little personal interest in protecting your data. So yeah, in the you personally context is probably a good point. But if law enforcement shows up at your ISP and says, give us all the data or pay this very expensive fine, your ISP is going to sell out your data, and like, they already sold it. We're going to talk about that. So, yeah. Going back to what I was talking about. So, we're going to need some background. Hold on. The Menti thing is in the way. Hold on. Let me see if we can make this go away. Ah, there we go. I can make it go away. Excellent. So, yeah, we're going to need some background, and we're going to go back to last year's lecture. So I'm assuming most of you attended Computer Organization and Networks last year, where you talked about networking layers. Might be called a little bit differently depending on whose lecture you watched, but essentially we're dividing networking tasks into 4 layers: the data link layer, the network layer, the transport layer, and the application layer. The data link layer sends data locally, so to a computer that you're directly connected to with a wire. The network layer or internet layer sends data far away to somebody that's other side of the globe. Transport layer structures transport and deals with multiplexing between applications. So if you have multiple applications that are transmitting data at the same time, transport layer figures out what data belongs to what application. And then finally, the application layer deals with actual productive data, so uses the other layers to provide some kind of service that you can actually use. Examples, data link layer Ethernet is a traditional wired example. The network layer is pretty much IP everywhere. We don't really have many alternatives. The question is just IPv4 or IPv6. At the transport layer, TCP, UDP are the big ones, and then some higher level protocols built on top of that kind of pretend to be the transport layer. And then at the application layer, we have everything. I gave some examples on the slides. HTTP, we're going to be talking about that. DNS, going to be talking about that. Secure Shell, maybe next time. And BGP is a big one, and that we're going to be talking about today as well. So we're going to be going through these layers pretty much in order. And today we're going to figure out, do the lower layers give us anything? So today's lecture is going to be, what if computer organization and networks, except everybody could be evil? Because in computer organization and networks, we had this very nice, perfect world, right? We said we have these networking standards, and if everybody plays along, we can send data and everything is going to be fine. Now, of course, we don't live in a perfect world. Not everybody is nice and is not going to play by the rules. So today's lecture, what if kind but everybody's evil? I thought I had a slide here. What if kind of everybody is evil? The spoiler I'm going to give you up front. The lower layers aren't going to help you. And today's lecture is going to be finding out the many ways, or some of the many ways in which they won't. So we're going to be starting, like I said, at the lowest layer. We're going to be talking about the Ethernet. So Ethernet is your boring wired connection that you probably have at home. I'm live streaming to you right now via an Ethernet cable, so this concerns most of us. So our attack scenario is going to be Alice is connected to some Ethernet switch in the center, and Eve is also connected to an Ethernet switch, the same Ethernet switch or the same network. And then Alice wants to send some data and Eve wants to intercept it. So the first note, wired connections have a big advantage of a wireless connection in that, well, they're wired. If you don't have a wired connection to the wired network, then you can't actually do that much. So if Eve doesn't have a wired connection, Eve can't do that much. Now, of course, there are some exceptions, like computer scientists love their fancy attacks. Google air gap attacks, and you're going to find many very, very cool theoretical attacks about how a device can attack another device if it's not connected to it. It's very cool, but usually pretty impractical. So not having a wired connection to a network, that is a wired network, has some inherent physical security. If you're not connected, there's a very, very low limit to what you can actually do. This is why many workplaces, for example, won't let you plug in your private device. If you bring your private laptop to work and plug it into the super secure office network, your private laptop might be a malicious actor. That doesn't mean that your workplace thinks that you're going to hack your workplace. I mean, you could do that from your office laptop probably. But the problem is that they don't know what's running on your private laptop. Right? Your office laptop is probably centrally monitored and centrally managed. They're making sure that its operating system is up to date. They're making sure that its software is up to date. They're making sure that hopefully there's no viruses or malware or anything of the sort running on your office laptop. Right? Your office IT has very strong control over what runs on your office laptop. Your private laptop doesn't work that way. Your private laptop is controlled by you. You run stuff on it, and maybe you're running, let's say, a 5-year-old version of Windows Vista that's still vulnerable to Chernobyl. And that would be awkward for the workplace if you suddenly plug in your private laptop and then their entire network gets hijacked. So that's why workplaces don't let you plug in foreign devices. And that is also why, going forward, we're going to assume that Eve actually has a network connection, because otherwise this is kind of boring. At least for the Ethernet part, of course. We're going to talk about Wi-Fi in a bit, and Wi-Fi is a lot more problematic because, well, it's wireless. But for Ethernet, we're going to assume that Eve has a network connection. Okay, so let's do some recap. I see a question. Regarding not allowing bring your own device, isn't it also a huge security risk? Okay, so I'm going to read it out a bit more slowly, sorry. The question is, regarding not allowing employees to bring their own devices, isn't it also a huge security risk to let employees use their own laptop in the home network? So now we're talking the other way around. If you're using your laptop at home, like your work laptop at home, isn't that a security risk? Yes, in a way. That's true. Now, it's less of a security risk because your managed device that you got from work is usually hardened fairly well. So you have endpoint security running on the device. You have, in a well-managed workplace, your device won't be able to do many things. For example, your office laptop probably can't even run PowerShell. Like in a well-managed workplace, your office laptop just has PowerShell turned off. Your office laptop just has Office macros turned off. So your office laptop that you bring home and use at home probably has many things locked down. So that limits the potential for exploitation of your home laptop a lot, or your office laptop a lot, even if you're bringing it home. So that's one reason. There's also a usability factor to it. And there's a second factor, which is VPNs, which we're going to be talking about later. So there's a usability factor to it because people need to, especially in COVID times, people need to use their devices at home because they need access to the office network, right? For many applications, it's required to have access to the office network. And well, if like you can't prevent that. Employees need that access, and they're going to get that access. And this is like an important concept that I guess fits here quite well. So this is a quote. It's not from me, but you can remember it. Security at the expense of usability comes at the expense of security. What I mean by that is, if your security solution is harming usability, is making it impossible for your users to actually do their job, then your users are just going to find a way around your security solution. You're not going to outsmart your users at the end of the day. You can't. It's impossible. Like, somebody's going to find a way around your security solution. You don't want to constantly be fighting your users as they're trying to circumvent your protection. Like, you're fighting the wrong guy at that point. So if your users need access to the office network from home, then if you can help it, you want them to be using their office devices because those are hardened. You don't want them using their home laptop where they have administrative privileges, where they have everything enabled, where they're downloading torrents in their free time and running them from questionable sources. You want them to be using the hardened laptop that they're only using for work because that minimizes the attack surface, right? So, like, yes, in an ideal world, you wouldn't be using, like, you would have strict, like, physical separation between the networks. You would just strictly be saying this laptop only goes in the office network. This laptop never goes in the office network, it only goes outside. The problem is it's unusable. And then people find ways around it. And then they start, like, transferring their files using USB drives. And they start transferring files by other means. And they just, like, they circumvent your separation because the separation breaks usability. And at that point, well, the moment that the user goes outside of your rule set because they're circumventing your rule set, that's the moment that your rule set is useless, right? Because at that point, like if your user is actively circumventing your protection, then your protection doesn't do anything. So you'd rather allow a little bit of attack surface, but prevent the user from actively fighting your system that you've built. But yeah, I mean, like, it depends on your context. Like, if you're in this, like, incredibly secure government facility managed by the CIA, then you probably will have, like, strict device policies that say no secure laptop may ever be plugged into X. Like, if you are in a sufficiently security critical environment, then you might have that kind of policy. but in the practical term, it's impractical for most contexts. Like security is always context sensitive. You can't say this is the ideal security solution for everybody, because if you do that and it becomes unusable, then, well, like I said, security at the expense of usability comes at the expense of security. If you're making it unusable for the user's going to circumvent it. That's bad. Yeah, bit of a digression, but I hope that answers the question somewhat. Okay, going back to the actual subject of this lecture. Yeah, so you might recall from computer organization and networks, Ethernet switches learn a mapping of switch port to MAC address. So this is, you might think, a security feature. If you watched Con last year or this year even, you will know that switches only forward Ethernet traffic out of the correct switch port. And they do this by learning a mapping of switch port to MAC address as packets are received. So every time an Ethernet frame is received, the switch records the source address and remembers which port it came from. Yeah, that's nice and all. The problem is, of course, wait. Ethernet switches learn a mapping. How do they learn a mapping? Whenever you hear a device saying, I'm learning something, the initial question for every security researcher is, wait, how can I mistrain this device? What inputs can I give so that the device learns the wrong thing? That would be funny. Yeah, of course, like that's the first attack we're going to be talking about today. It's very trivial, really. It's a nice introduction to network attacks. Switches are embedded devices with limited memory. So embedded devices like switches have memory banks of like a few hundred megabytes usually, if at that. Like many of them are going to have less. What happens if the switch runs out of space for its port to MAC map, which has some fixed allocated buffer usually? Well, it just runs out of memory. What does it do? Many switches are just going to drop the oldest entries. So many switches are just going to go, wait, I don't have enough memory of script. Like this oldest entry, I don't need this anymore. It's probably stale. Just overwrite it. And what happens if the switch doesn't know the destination address? Well, if the switch doesn't have the destination address in its source address table, it just floods the unicast frame to every port, as you will recall from Con. So the switch, in this case, Eve can just send Ethernet frames, garbage Ethernet frames from a variety of different addresses. And at some point, the switch is going to run out of space in its SAT table and just drop the actual entries, right? Like the actual user-generated actual MAC addresses are just going to get dropped. And then unicast, and then at that point, the switch just falls back to essentially being an Ethernet hub. So as you might recall from Con, an Ethernet hub is a device that essentially just mirrors incoming traffic to every port. While an Ethernet switch actually does smart thinking and only forwards traffic to the correct port. And by making the switch run out of memory, we're effectively forcing it to revert to being a hub, because it no longer has the information it needs to behave intelligently. So at that point, once the legitimate entries actually get dropped out of the source address table, we just start flooding unicast frames to every port. At which point, of course, since they're being flooded to every port, they're also being flooded to the port that Eve is connected to, and then Eve can just read the Ethernet frames. So if Eve is connected to your wired network, Eve can just probably read everything. Every Ethernet frame. Okay, so the Ethernet level doesn't really help us. Yeah. Moving on. So Ethernet, we recap Ethernet real quick. If Eve is connected to your wired network, like to the actual same logical network, of course, this is worth noting. You might recall virtual LANs, VLANs, from the Con lecture. Virtual LANs are a method of segmentation in software. Essentially, on professional switches, you can segment the switch ports into different virtual LANs. And what that means is that any traffic that comes in from a switch port on a certain LAN only gets sent to other devices on that same on ports that are on the same LAN, right? So for example, let's say we take ports 1 through 5 and we say these are VLAN 1. And then we take ports 6 through 10 and we say this is VLAN 2. Now, any traffic that comes in on port, say 1, is only going to be sent to the first 5 ports, because these are a separate VLAN. And even if the switch is like relatively quote unquote dumb and its SAT is a single memory block, so Eve can still manage to run the SAT out of memory. Even then, like even once the switch falls back to broadcasting, it's still not going to broadcast across a VLAN boundary. So even if the switch is forced to revert to being a hub, it's still going to only broadcast to ports 1 through 5. If like traffic is going to stay within its VLAN. So this attack doesn't work across VLAN, which is relevant. So VLANs are still a fairly good security boundary. They're not ideal. Like ideally you want physical separation, but they're better than the alternative, which is not VLAN. Okay, moving on to Wi-Fi, because I'm looking at the clock and we've already spent 30 minutes on Ethernet. So Wi-Fi is a lot more interesting, because while Ethernet, you can fairly easily say, okay, it's a wired connection, just don't let the attacker plug their device in and you win, right? Easy. The problem with Wi-Fi, of course, is that it's a shared medium. Especially public Wi-Fi, if you're at your favorite coffee shop and you're joining their Wi-Fi. It's been a while since we were able to go to coffee shops. Yeah, you're at your favorite coffee shop and you use your Wi-Fi. Public Wi-Fi is a shared medium. What does that mean? Every client can listen to every packet. Wait a second. Every client can listen to every packet. That's bad, because like your attacker can just connect to the same Wi-Fi that you're using and listen to every packet. Yeah, that's awkward. That's awkward. Also worth noting, the attacker can also just inject packets. It's also relevant. Like when I say listen, I should probably make this more clear next year. So when I say listen, I don't always mean just listen. I'm gonna make this distinction now. So there's 2 different objectives that our attacker might have here, very roughly speaking. So the attacker might want to monitor what our traffic is. So for example, if you're connecting to your Facebook account, and let's imagine this is the year 2005, when nobody was using HTTPS, and you're connecting to your Facebook account in plain text. And you're logging in and pressing enter, and you get a session cookie. And we're going to talk about what session cookies are next week. But you get a cookie, and this information that you get from the server is important, right? And it has to be secured by you. And if the attacker can now read this data you're getting from the server, or I mean, let's make it a more obvious example. You're logging in to Facebook, and this is 2000, so nobody's using HTTPS even for logon sites. And you're logging into Facebook via HTTP in 2000, and you're typing in your username, you're typing in your password, you hit enter, and now your browser just sends your username and password in plain text over the wire. Now here, if the attacker can just read the information that you're sending, the attacker gets your username and password, and the attacker wins. Right? So this is the quote-unquote easier thing for the attacker to accomplish. Just read your traffic. Now, of course, in the modern world, we don't use HTTP anymore, mostly, thankfully. So just reading the traffic is often not going to help the attacker. So now the second thing an attacker might want to do is modify the traffic. For example, if you're entering, like you're going to your browser and you're typing facebook.com, and this is the year 2015, let's say. It doesn't work anymore today for Facebook. You type facebook.com, you hit enter. What usually happens? Your browser sends an HTTP request to facebook.com and says, hello, facebook.com, I would like to request this website. And then facebook.com responds and says, no. 301 redirect https facebook.com. And then your browser goes, my bad, request to https facebook.com. Now what can an attacker do if they can modify your traffic? Well, you make a request to Facebook, hello, facebook.com, HTTP request. And usually you would get back a response saying, please ask on HTTPS. But the attacker can change the traffic. So the attacker can now modify the traffic and just insert a response that looks like Facebook's login page, but is served over HTTP. So when you log in, they get your password. So these are two different attack scenarios, very simple ones, that require different things of the attacker. They can either read the traffic or they can also modify the traffic. And in public Wi-Fi, every client can listen to every packet, and every client can also send packets. So Eve can also just hijack your traffic. This is why, for example, if you've ever worked in an office that has IT policy and got an office laptop, they will have told you to never use that office laptop in a coffee shop or in an airport Wi-Fi or something like that without turning on VPN. Because VPN is designed to just like one use case here is just circumventing exactly this, because VPN prevents Eve from modifying the traffic that is being sent over the VPN connection. So effectively, it's preventing Eve from hijacking you when you log onto your office network, for example. Couldn't you simply change the DNS requests too? Yes, you could. It's the same problem essentially. Essentially, if Eve can modify your traffic, Eve has a very large number of ways of screwing with you. You could just modify DNS responses. Yeah, you could just forge DNS responses. That works too. So there's many different ways you can screw with somebody if you can modify their upstream traffic. And there are ways around it. We're going to talk mitigations on, like when we actually get to the application layer, which is going to be happening in the next lecture. We're going to be talking mitigations, and we're going to be talking about ways how we can avoid these attacks in the year 2021, thankfully. But every little mitigation only takes off one attack path, and a solid defense in depth strategy is still don't let Eve modify your traffic. It's still a very good defense strategy. But yes, you can do that. And we're actually going to have one example of DNS hijacking later today when we talk about BGP. So look forward to that, probably after the break. Okay, so in a public Wi-Fi network, every client can listen to all packets, every client can send packets. This is horrible. Try not to connect to these if you can help it, or make sure you're using HTTPS when you do. Okay, so of course, public networks. Nobody uses those, right? Even coffee shops have passwords these days. Even if they're not the most secure ones, they still usually have passwords. What if the network isn't public? Well, then packets are encrypted. Yay, security. Okay, so the question now is, okay, what encryption standard are we using? WEP is the oldest Wi-Fi encryption standard that was widely used. The acronym, and I hate to say this, it stood for Wired Equivalent Privacy. It was neither wired equivalent nor was it particularly private, so that didn't age well. WEP was broken in 2001. Please don't use it. So we had the next generation of security in Wi-Fi, WPA. WPA1, or also known as WPA TKIP, is the broken version, very broken version of the WPA standards. We're not going to be talking about that, broken since 2015. Now we're going to be talking about the two that you should actually be using. WPA2 and WPA3. 2 is the one that you're going to be able to use on practically every modern device. Like every device since the last time I had to set up a web network was when I had like a Nintendo DS. The original DS in like 2007 or something. Was the last time I had to set my wireless network to web. Since then, every device I've ever used has supported WPA2, so should be able to use that for everything. The crypto is not broken as opposed to the crypto of the other two. So at least on the cryptographic level, WPA2 is good. Not good. I can see Maria fuming because Maria hates the crypto in WPA2, but at least like the cryptographic primitives aren't broken. Let's put it this way. And it's available on all modern devices, which is good. And then we have WPA3, which is like actually like cryptographically fine, more or less. And brings improved protocol level security. Well, I mean, like I say improved. Improved? What improved? Are you implying that WPA2 isn't secure? Yeah, I thought, question in chat instantly. WPA2 is broken too, right? Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah, that's the next bit. Like, WPA2 is very much a matter of, like, you might not have a better alternative. There is limited availability of WPA3 right now in devices. If you ask me in like 2 or 3 years, my answer is probably going to be use WPA3, and at that point WPA2 is probably going to be a red cross on the slide. The problem is that right now on many end devices you don't have WPA3 support yet. On many Wi-Fi routers you don't have WPA3 support yet. And at that point WPA2 might be the best worst option. There are some caveats to using it, which we're going to be talking about on the next few slides. So yeah, improve protocol level security. What does that mean, and why is the commenter saying WPA2 is broken? So WPA2 PSK is what we're going to be talking about. That's what you typically are going to be thinking of when you're thinking about home use. The alternative is WPA2 Enterprise. WPA2 Enterprise is WPA2 using a dedicated authentication server. So, for example, the one you're probably familiar with on this is EduRoam, the educational roaming Wi-Fi that most of you probably have set up on your phones. That's WPA2 Enterprise. So it outsources the authentication part to an external server, and that actually has some very good cryptographic implications. So WPA2 Enterprise is the version of WPA2 that is actually like fine. But the problem, of course, is that you're not running a dedicated authentication server at home, probably. So WPA2 PSK is what you might be stuck with. If you're using a Wi-Fi router that is like a 2018 home use model and not like a 2021 enterprise model with the latest fancy spec, WPA2 probably what you're stuck with. Yeah. So you're using a pre-shared key. What does pre-shared key mean? It's a fancy word for network password or derived from a network password. You're pre-sharing your authentication key with the other party through some external means. So effectively, you're giving them the Wi-Fi password. That's what pre-sharing means. You're giving out your Wi-Fi password, and anybody that you've given the Wi-Fi password to can connect to the network. Okay, the good about WPA2 PSK, if you don't have the password, traffic is inaccessible. Like the cryptographic primitives behind WPA2 are not broken, so if you don't have the password, you're mostly, like if the attacker doesn't have the password, if Eve doesn't have the password, is sitting outside of the office building, doesn't have your Office 22 password, you're probably fine. The bad. The password can be brute forced offline. This is probably what you were talking about when you said WPA2 is broken too. Once you record a single genuine user's handshake authentication with the access point, you can then brute force the network password offline. That's bad. Second bad is connection control. So control over which devices are connected to the network is not authenticated. What does that mean? We're going to talk about it in a second. Third one, no forward secrecy. So if the Wi-Fi password is broken once, then you can now retroactively decrypt everything that you've recorded. So if Eve is sitting outside of the office and just recording everything, like all the encrypted packets that Eve sees on the air, and then at some point in the future Eve breaks the office password, then Eve can now retroactively decrypt everything. And finally, the fourth point, weak per user key derivation. So if the actual Wi-Fi password is known, then we can decrypt every user's traffic. So similar to a wired network, once we know the password, or a public Wi-Fi, once we know the password, we can just read everything. Not only traffic that is meant for us. Okay, so this wouldn't be a cryptographic lecture if we didn't do some cryptography. Maria would disapprove if we didn't. So let's do some cryptography. So WP2PSK has two keys that you need to worry about, encryption keys. The first one is the pairwise master key. A pairwise master key, I'm actually not sure why it's called pairwise, is the master key that is derived from the network password. So this is essentially taking your quote-unquote insecure, because it's usually human generated and humans tend to be pretty bad at entropy, usually insecure password and the network SSID, so the network name, and shoving those two into a strong password hashing function. A password hashing function is essentially a hash function that is slow to calculate. I think Maria mentioned this briefly in her slides. A password hashing function is essentially a hash function that is designed to be slow. Now, why would you want that? Because you, like in a genuine attacks, like in a genuine use case, if you're using it non-maliciously, then you're only using it once. This applies both to Wi-Fi authentication, but also to, for example, logging onto a server or logging onto a website. In a genuine use case, if the user knows the password, you're only running the hash function once. So you can afford it if your hash function, say, takes a second to calculate and uses 100 megabytes of memory, right? That's fine. Like that's roughly the scope we're talking about here. And you can, with modern hash functions, you can scale this. You can say, I would like my hash function to consume 500 megabytes of memory. And then you get a hash function that requires you to have 500 megabytes of immediately accessible memory to calculate. However, what does an attacker need to do if they want to brute force your password hash? So they have the hash, they want to find the password. What do they have to do if the crypto isn't broken? They have to brute force the password. So they have to guess the password, which, yeah, like they might use like common words, they might do a dictionary attack or whatever. They have to guess your password. But if like you're only doing the function once, so for you, taking a second per calculation using 200 megabytes of RAM is fine. For an attacker, it's not fine. Because the attacker isn't calculating your password hash once. The attacker is calculating your password hash millions of times because they're trying millions of different passwords. So the reason, like this is the deal about password hashing functions. I have a question. Hasn't SHA-1 been broken? Yes. SHA-1 is broken, quote unquote. We're going to talk about what breaking a hash means in just a second. Let me finish talking about password hashing. So so a password hashing function is a hashing function that is designed to take a long time to calculate, and for modern password hashing function also to use a lot of memory to calculate. I didn't mark this here. PBKDF2 is like fine if you can use a more modern design, like password hashing function that is designed to do password hashing. Argon 2 is the usual example, I would say. If you want to like do password hashing for your website or whatever, use Argon 2. But yeah, so the pairwise master key is derived from the SSID and the password using a strong password hashing function, which is fine, like cryptographically fine. And then we take this pairwise master key and we use this pairwise master key to derive for each user a pairwise transient key. Now this is actually pairwise. This is actually a key that is shared between the Wi-Fi access point and your computer. So when your computer connects to the Wi-Fi network, it derives this pairwise master key because you type in the password. And then it exchanges a handshake with the access point. And in that handshake, it exchanges nonces. So you have heard the word nonce before in Maria's part of the lecture. A nonce is a number that is only used once. That's where the name comes from. So it's a one-time random number that is not private. It's just different each time. So it prevents collision attacks. or reuse attacks, the nonce. So, not collision attacks, reuse attacks, of course. So the nonce is different every time, but it's not private information, it's public information. So during the handshake, we exchange nonces, so you and the access point exchange nonces. Of course, you know each other's MAC address, and you both have the same pairwise master key, and you shove all of this information into this HMAC SHA-1 keyed hash function, which is a regular hash function, and you derive this pairwise transient key. Okay. And then you verify that you have the same pairwise transient key, and if you do, then you've successfully authenticated, because that means you have the same information in there, so the same pairwise master key. Now the comment in Q&A was, hasn't SHA-1 been broken? What does breaking a hash function mean, though, is the thing. Now, breaking a hash function can mean many different things. In the case of SHA-1, the breakage that I'm aware of is collisions. So there have been practical collisions on SHA-1, or semi-practical-ish collisions on SHA-1. So what does a collision mean? You should know this, but let's recap it real quick. So a collision for a hash function means that you can practically find two inputs that map to the same hash value, right? That's what a collision is. So you shouldn't be able to find these for a cryptographic hash function. It should be impossible. But it isn't for SHA-1, so we can say SHA-1 is broken. So you shouldn't use SHA-1. SHA-1 is bad. Don't use SHA-1. Use a modern hash function, please. If you're just doing regular hashing as well, use a modern hash function. Why does this matter? What does a collision do? For example, if you're signing something with a cryptographic signature, you're usually signing a hash of the data. So for example, if you're signing with your phone, you're signing with a mobile phone signature, a PDF. Then what you're signing is a hash over the PDF. So the server hashes the entire PDF you're signing, and then does a cryptographic signature over that hash. So you're not signing the full document, because that would be impractical. You're signing just the hash of the document. And then it appends that signature to the document. And now it's a signed PDF and has like legal binding value and whatnot, as you all know. But what does it mean if we can find a collision? That means we can find two PDF documents that have the same hash value. So what does that mean? I can I can have a contract that says you will pay me €1, and then I can make a different contract that says you will pay me €1,000,000, and they have the same hash because I found a collision in SHA-1. I can produce collisions. So I can have these two contracts that have the same hash value, and I give you this contract that says you will pay me €1 because you owe me €1, and I give you this contract, and you €1 sounds legit. You sign this cryptographically. You give me the signed contract. What's the problem? They have the same hash value. So I can take your signature for the first contract, which signed that you're going to pay me €1, and I can take that signature, append it to the second contract, and now it's valid because they have the same hash value. You only signed the hash value. So if I can find a collision in a hash function, I can do that kind of shenanigans. This is, for example, relevant in SSL certificates. If I can find two SSL certificates with the same hash, then I can say request a SSL certificate for mydomain.org, which I legitimately own. I send the request, I get the certificate back. What the certificate contains is a cryptographic signature of the hash of my information. The certificate authority is signing that this is correct, they have verified this. And now I can take the signature and I can append it to a different certificate, which has the same hash, which is for, say, google.com. That's why a collision means that a hash function is quote-unquote broken, right? That's what you can do for SHA-1. For SHA-1, you can find collisions. But this is bad. And because nuanced communication is hard, and saying X is broken is easy, and because there's better alternatives, cryptographers are just going to say SHA-1 is broken, don't use it. And this is the most digestible course of action. Just don't use SHA-1, there's better alternatives. There's no reason to be using SHA-1. But in this specific context, SHA-1 isn't broken. Like in this specific context where we're just using it with like nonces to derive a key, this is like SHA-1 being broken isn't the problem here. Now, of course, there is a problem here because it's highlighted in red. Let's get back to the slides. Sorry, guys. I go on these rants. It happens. I hope it's educational. So, yeah. Let's go back to the slides, and then like in 10 minutes we're going to do a break so you guys can catch your breath, and I can also catch my breath. But for now, let's go back to the slides. So we have this pairwise transient key per user, and it's derived using HMAC SHA-1 and unpredictable information. This is good. This is marked in green because it's good. Unpredictable information is always very good. Why? Because it makes it hard to pre-compute. Pre-computation is a really common trade-off in cryptography, in attacks on cryptography, where an attacker is going to spend a lot of time pre-computing information, like a large table of information. And then the trade-off is that they can then use that large table on every attack, right? Instead of having to do the work again for every attack they try to do, they just pre-compute it once, spend a relatively long amount of time, but then if they can use it often enough, it pays off. So unpredictable information is really good because the nonces are different every time. So you can't pre-compute this value because the nonces are going to be different every time. The information, of course, is publicly exchanged, so there's no forward secrecy. Once we have the pairwise master key, we can always derive this key in retrospect. If we record the handshake with the nonces, we can always, if we have the pairwise master key, we can always derive this in retrospect. There's no forward secrecy, we can always decrypt old traffic. And now the final thing is, and this is red, and this is the key. This is a regular keyed hash function. This is very fast to calculate, as opposed to the other one, which was a strong password hashing function. We talked at length about how this is important. This is a slow function that is intentionally hard to calculate. It's slow to brute force. The other one, very fast to calculate. Awkward. So yeah, verifying a password guess is very slow, right? If you want to verify a password guess, if I say, I guess that your password is, what was it? Charging horse battery stable? Something like that, the XKCD password. If I guess that that is your password, this is slow to verify. I need to calculate this password hashing function and spend a second and use 500 megabytes of memory, maybe, to verify this guess. But verifying a pairwise master key guess, so verifying that a guess for the result of this hashing function is correct, is very fast. Because if I have a guess for this pairwise master key, then I can just do this HMAC SHA-1 calculation, which is really quick, and verify if the result decrypts the rest of the handshake. So verifying password guess slow, verifying a pairwise master key is fast, and the pairwise master key doesn't have any unpredictable information. Well, isn't that awkward? So the pairwise master key only depends on the SSID and the password. We can pre-calculate this. Yay, we just talked about pre-calculation, right? We spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of memory to pre-calculate information, and then we use it on many attacks. Lovely. Yeah, pre-calculated tables for pairwise master keys for WPA2 exist on the internet. You can download these. The one I found on the internet had 1 million common passwords from some compilation of common passwords, and the 1,000 most common SSIDs. Excerpt on the left, sorted by how common they are. So you can already see at the top of this list we have Linksys. Yeah, that's the default SSID for Linksys routers, maybe unsurprisingly. No SSID at all, just delete the entire field. Default, well, yeah, that probably was a default setting at some point. Netgear, yeah, that's a brand. Wireless, well, yeah, WLAN, yeah. And then Belkin 45G, 54G. That's probably a certain very common brand of Belkin routers. MS Home, it's probably some Microsoft thing. Home, well, yeah, DAW. HP Setup, that's the auto configuration wireless LAN for HP. HP's direct to printer thing. SMC, I actually have no idea what that is. Tsunami, I don't know. They get more uncommon as you go down the line. T-Mobile is, yeah, I mean, that's probably used to be the default for T-Mobile routers. But yeah, So if you're using a common SSID, one of the 1,000 most common SSIDs, and one of the 1 million most common passwords, and an attacker has spent the time to download these 33 gigabytes worth of pairwise master keys, then they can fairly easily, I say, I mean, this is still 1 billion SHA-1 iterations to verify all the possible entries in that rainbow table. So on average, it's going to be half that. On average, it's going to be, well, slightly less than half that because they're sorted by how common they are, right? But on average, it's still going to be on the scale of like 500 million SHA-1 iterations or SHA-1 evaluations to find the correct password guess. But still, this is very fast. SHA-1 is a very fast hash function. So yeah, the solution to this is don't use a common SSID and password, please. So that's the main caveat if using WPA2. Change the default SSID. The SSID actually matters for security because they're using the SSID as an input to this pairwise master key. So if your SSID is not unpredictable, but uncommon. So for example, your last name is probably fairly uncommon, or like your last name dash something, your last name dash battery horse, is uncommon enough that it's not going to be in the 1,000 most common SSIDs, or even the 2,000 most common SSIDs if somebody makes the rainbow table larger. And the SSID actually matters for the security here because it's an input to the pairwise master key derivation. So if your SSID is unpredictable, the pre-computation is useless. That's the point. Okay, so don't use a common SSID, don't use a common password. Good. So WPA2 is it's broken if Eve can guess the password. Okay, what if Eve knows the password? I mean, we already spoiled this earlier. What if we know the password? Well, if Eve knows the password, what is in the calculation for a pairwise transient key? The pairwise master key, which is just derived from SSID and password. Eve knows this. The nonces, that those are exchanged in plain text, and the MAC addresses are publicly available. So once Eve knows the password, Eve can just read all of the data being transmitted passively. Doesn't need to do anything. So once Eve knows the password, WP2 PSK is as good as public Wi-Fi. Okay, so we've talked about this a few times, right? Eve needs to see these nonces, like in this pairwise transient key derivation. There's these nonces, and these nonces are the unpredictable information about the handshake. They make it hard to pre-compute this handshake. Of course, you need these nonces to derive the pairwise transient key. So what if Eve connects to the Wi-Fi, because Eve has a password, but I've already been connected to the Wi-Fi for the last 10 minutes. So I don't need to do this handshake anymore. I've already done this handshake, and I've already exchanged my nonces, and Eve didn't see it. So Eve doesn't have the nonces. What can Eve do? Well, the problem is that, like we mentioned briefly at the start when we complained about all the things wrong with WPA2, WPA2 does not encrypt control frames. Control frames are frames that are not data frames, so not actual data being transmitted, but are frames coordinating the actual connection between access point and client. And WPA2 does not encrypt or otherwise authenticate that a control frame is legitimate. So what can Eve do? Eve can just send this beautiful frame that I've crafted on the image. Yeah, sorry, I don't like you anymore. Please re-authenticate. So Eve can just de-authenticate Bob by just sending a forged frame from the access point's MAC address saying, you have been disconnected. And Bob's computer is just going to buy that and just going to go, oh, well, that is awkward. I've been disconnected. Guess I better just close the Wi-Fi connection then. And what's going to happen next? Well, Bob's probably going to go, wait, why did my internet just cut out? Stupid Wi-Fi connect. Well, congratulations, there's your handshake. Yeah, we can now read all the data. So yeah, the handshake bit isn't going to save you. If Eve wants a handshake, Eve is going to get a handshake. So yeah, everything is on fire. If you have to use WPA2, don't use a common SSID and password combination. I mean, just don't use a common of either of the two, really. Use an uncommon SSID and use an uncommon password. So yeah, WPA3 security fixes these problems, which is good. So we have a quick question on WPA2. This is true. Yeah, I mean, the question is, couldn't you simply flood an area with these control frames to jam Wi-Fi in a specific area? Yeah. Like if you want to deny Wi-Fi access, you can do that very easily. You just flood these control frames from the access point's MAC address, and those clients are just going to constantly drop connections. People actually used to do that, and they used to do that in hotels. Funny story of that. So very quick story time, and then we're going to do like 2 more slides, and then we're going on break, I promise. So in hotels, some hotels, they sell you Wi-Fi. When you check in, you can purchase hotel Wi-Fi at usually exorbitant rates. And of course, they would like you to use hotel Wi-Fi instead of your personal Wi-Fi, right? Because that's bad for business if they're using, if the customers aren't buying your exorbitantly priced Wi-Fi. So what they would do is they would have devices that would scan for networks, for Wi-Fi networks that weren't the hotel network. For example, if you used your phone to set up a Wi-Fi access point for your laptop, this device would obviously see this phone access point. Oh yeah, a word of note. I didn't put this on the slides explicitly, but in this list of common SSIDs I showed, you will see at number 18 is the entry hidden SSID. A hidden SSID is actually not hidden at all. Just saying. Hidden SSID just isn't hidden at all. It's still perfectly visible to anybody monitoring the network. So the Wi-Fi signals. So yeah, like the device is gonna see your network even if you set it to not show SSID. And so when you set up a Wi-Fi hotspot on your phone and want to connect to it for your laptop so you can have internet without paying stupid amounts of money to the hotel, this device would see this and would just flood you with the authentication frames. So effectively, they would just disconnect you from your own Wi-Fi whenever you tried to use it to try to force you to buy hotel Wi-Fi. And they got sued for that. The Federal Communications Commission in the US sued a bunch of hotel chains for doing that, and they lost, and they had to stop doing it. But yeah, that's like, you're not the first person to have that idea. People have tried that. The problem is, if you're sufficiently big and you do it sufficiently publicly, you will get sued for it. So yeah, WPA3 fixes issues, which is good. That's why we have it. Traffic is now inaccessible without the password. Well, yeah, we already had that. Good, still. The password can no longer be attacked offline because it uses like proper cryptographic authentication protocols. It also uses authenticated connection control frames, so you can no longer forge, you can no longer easily forge authentication, control frames. You can no longer disconnect people. It provides forward secrecy, which is good. So we no longer can decrypt traffic retroactively. This is always important because, of course, this is like the point between forward secrecy, and you've probably heard this from Maria already, but cryptography always advances, and so do attackers' technologies. Computers keep getting faster. So the cryptography we have today is going to keep getting weaker and weaker comparatively. So what we don't want is somebody to record traffic now, and then in 20 years be able to easily break our cryptography and just read all the traffic. We want forward secrecy, which means if you weren't there at the time and able to decrypt or interfere, then you can't, going backward, do it easily. So yeah, forward secrecy is provided, we can't retroactively decrypt, and a strong pro-user key derivation which fixes the pre-computation issue we had earlier. Good. So WPA3 is awesome. And before we all go on break and disappear, I have an audience question for you. Because all this WPA stuff is nice. Do you turn off Wi-Fi on your phone when you go out? Oh, we have one person voting yes. I think you're lying. I think you should have voted the third option if you say yes. I don't think many people do this. No, okay, no, yeah, more honest. Be honest, people. I swear to God, I'm not, like, I'm at home. I can't attack your phones right now. Okay, a lot of yeses. Wow, that's impressive. This is like the most yeses I've ever seen on this question. Okay, do you turn off Wi-Fi on your phone when you go? Okay. Gonna go to the next slide, and we're gonna reuse this quiz. So, okay, and we still have some questions coming in. Some answers coming in. Let's wait a bit. Okay, so 44% of you consistently always turn your Wi-Fi off when you go out the door. Okay. Paranoid bunch. Okay, let's go to the next question. Reset the results on this one. I should go back down to 0 in a second. I think. Yeah, there we go. Okay, next question. Have you ever been on Flixbus or an ÖBB train and used the Wi-Fi there? This especially, of course, goes to the people that said no on the previous question. Also for the people that said I don't like where this is going on the previous question. This also goes for you. You ever been on Flixbus and used Wi-Fi there? Okay, 78% have either been on Flixbus or an ÖBB train and used Wi-Fi there. Huh. 82. 25, 75. Okay, so a majority of you. So there is some significant overlap between those of you that have been on Flixbus and use Wi-Fi there, and those of you that, don't turn your Wi-Fi off when you go out. Okay. What do you think is going to happen if Eve just takes a laptop and sets up a Wi-Fi access point that's called Flixbus near you? Or, ÖBB, if you were on a train. What do you think is going to happen? Huh. Your phone likes free Wi-Fi. So since you've previously connected to that Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi networks, like Android phones tend to have this enabled by default to say connect automatically, or at least older Wi-Fi. Older Android phones do. Mine still does. I'm not sure what it's like on like current Android. But most devices tend to have this checked that says connect automatically. Your phone is going to see this free Wi-Fi network because you haven't turned off Wi-Fi, and is just gonna connect to this free Wi-Fi network because it knows it. And now, of course, you're connecting to the internet via, it doesn't even have to be public Wi-Fi at this point. You're just connecting via Wi-Fi, which is controlled by Eve. Like, this could be an encrypted Wi-Fi. This could be a WPA3 network. It doesn't matter. Like, if the attacker is your access point, you're screwed either way. Like, cryptography isn't going to protect you at that point. At least not like Wi-Fi cryptography, right? It's not going to protect you at that point. So if this is like this doesn't have to be Flixbus. Like, this could be a WPA3 encrypted coffee shop network. And Eve just gets the password like everybody else, and then Eve goes outside and sets up a WPA3 access point with the same SSID and password. And then you're going to connect to that access point because it's closer to you. And then you're connecting to the internet via Eve, and then you lose. So it doesn't even have to be Flixbus or ÖBB. It's just the most common example I think that people are going to be familiar with. Somebody in the Q&A said I turned Wi-Fi off because of battery usage. Oh yeah, good. That's very security conscious of you. And you should be glad that you do. So now every one of you is going to turn off Wi-Fi when you go out. I know it. Okay, so we're done with Wi-Fi. We're done with the data link layer, and now we are going on the promised 15-minute break. And then afterward, we're going to resume until 12. So that means 15 minutes, that's 10:54, I think. Yeah, 10:54. So we're going to reconvene at 10:54, that's in 15 minutes, and I will see you then. Bye-bye. And as soon as I can find OBS, I'm also going to turn off the sound. There we go. Microphone re-enabled. Should be able to hear me. We got a question in the break. Is this my dog? Yes, this is my dog. And he was very insistent on coming into the room during the break. So I removed him from the room. He's called Isabel. Yes, he's my dog. Okay, so we are back. Actually, we are back in 30 seconds. We have 30 more seconds to go before I told people they'd have to be back. Presenter. There we go. Yep. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. We are back with information security. Welcome back from the break for those of you in the live studio audience. Welcome back from skipping forward 30 seconds at a time to those of you on YouTube. So we just talked before the break about the data link layer. We talked about Ethernet, and we said, okay, on an Ethernet network, we are pretty much screwed if Eve is connected to the network. And then we talked about Wi-Fi, and we concluded that on most Wi-Fi standards, so everything up to WPA2, we are screwed if Eve has the password, and we're also screwed if our SSID and password are fairly common. We said, okay, WPA3 fixes many of these issues. That's good. And then we had this interesting slightly orthogonal attack, where we don't attack the actual existing Wi-Fi. We just impersonate it, and phones are typically more than willing to just connect to this new Wi-Fi. And at that point, like if your access point is attacking you, you're screwed anyway. Okay, so let's move on to the next layer. The next layer, the internet layer. We are going to talk about this in 2 steps. So first, we're going to talk about the internet layer in a local network. Now, why is this relevant? We already talked about Ethernet, and we said we're screwed if Eve is connected. So what's the deal? Well, Eve is connected. If Eve is connected, we have these SAT table attacks on switches. Now, switches have gotten more and more smart, and switches have started applying various mitigations to make these attacks harder. So now we're going to talk about the same attack scenario. Alice is connected to this local network, Eve is connected to the same local network, and then there's the internet. And now we're talking layer 3. We're talking internet layer. So another quick recap from Con. The address resolution protocol translates between IP addresses and MAC addresses. So you might recall that at the network layer, we're dealing with IP addresses. For IPv4, which is the most common IP standard right now, we're dealing with 32-bit IP addresses. And at the data link layer, we're dealing in MAC addresses, which are 48-bit, and they don't correspond. So we need to, for a given IP address, find the associated MAC address. That's the goal of the ARP, the Address Resolution Protocol. It's a really, really, really basic protocol from the 80s that just says, okay, if you don't know the associated MAC address, you just send a request, an ARP request, to the broadcast address, the data link layer broadcast address, all once. That gets flooded to everybody. And then you just get an ARP reply from the host with that IP address. So you just say, okay, I am looking for an IP address 129.168.0.1, and whoever that is, please raise your hand. And then the correct host raises their hand and says, yep, that's me. And then you just record this in your cache, and then you're good. In an ideal world where everybody is nice and there are no attackers, of course. Because, hold on. ARP reply from the host with the desired IP address. What's stopping the attacker? Nothing is the answer. Nothing is stopping the attacker. The address resolution protocol doesn't provide any authentication for these requests. There is no proof of any kind that we actually own the or that this is our IP address. So Eve can just insert the computer into this connection by just sending spoofed ARP replies. Whenever you get an ARP request, you just say back, yep, that's me. That's me. Even if it's not your IP address, who cares? Just say that it's me. Okay, so we have a question on Q&A, and we're actually going to do that real quick because that's about Wi-Fi. The question is, wouldn't it be easy to avoid connecting to the fake SSID device by checking the MAC address of the device broadcasting the SSID? So instead of just saving the MAC address of the access, just saving the SSID of the network, you're saving the SSID of the network and the MAC address of the access point, is the suggestion that we have in Q&A. There's two problems here. The first problem is that most Wi-Fis are not going to have just one access point. Like in the Flixbus example we gave, right? The Flixbus Wi-Fi is the same on every Flixbus you go on. Or the ÖBB Wi-Fi is the same on every ÖBB train you ride. But of course it's not the same access point everywhere, right? They just have the same SSID, and that's intended. Like, they're all pretending to be the same network, so it seamlessly works. But of course it's different access points. So this is to some degree by design. On the other hand, even worse, even if you're within, like, you could say, okay, that's great, like, let's trade that off. Let's just say, okay, we link it to the MAC address, and now we can only connect to that one access point, and if we get on a different Flixbus, then we'll just have to reconnect. Who cares? Fine, that's a security trade-off, we can do that. Well, okay, but what was the problem? Have you ever been to like a 15-story hotel? Like a really big hotel? And you use hotel Wi-Fi because either they flood you with the authentication frames, or more likely that their Wi-Fi is actually affordable and convenient and you use it, or maybe it's even free and comes with the room. Have you ever wondered why you can have a Wi-Fi connection in your room on the 14th floor, and then you go to the ground floor and you still have a Wi-Fi connection? You ever wondered how that works? Yeah, the thing is, of course, that you're traversing between different access points along the way. Like, they just have different access points on different floors distributed intelligently so that they cover most of the hotel. And they all broadcast the same SSID and the same MAC address, and they're all the same SSID and the same, they broadcast the same SSID, they use the same password. And your device is just seamlessly switching between them as you move. And they're all linked to the same layer 2 network in the back, so the same data link layer network in the back end. So for your device, it's seamless. You can just move between all of these access points with the same IP address on the same Wi-Fi network. Like, it's the same Wi-Fi network, and your device is just switching between access points as you move. So, like, this is like a genuine use case that you would completely break if you force the MAC address to stay the same. Like, you don't want your user to have to re-authenticate 5 times as they're going down the escalator. Like, as they're going from the 14th floor to the ground floor. You don't want them to I'm out of range of the 14th floor now, I have to re-authenticate. Screw it, I'm on the 8th floor now, I'm out of range again. Re-authenticate, and every time enter the password because it's a different access point. Like, that's not feasible, right? Very quickly. And the third problem with your suggestion, where are you taking the access point's MAC address from? Like, maybe that's the most pressing issue with your suggestion. Who's telling you that the attacker is going to be honest about their MAC address? You can't just copy the MAC address and just broadcast the same MAC address. Like, there's no downside to that. The other two are usability scenarios where that get broken by that, but the third one is there's no authentication of MAC addresses. There's no rule, force of nature that is forcing you to broadcast the right MAC address. A MAC address is ephemeral on the modern internet. Your phone, every time you connect to a Wi-Fi network, public Wi-Fi or any Wi-Fi, your phone is sending a randomly generated MAC address for privacy reasons. Modern Android phones or modern Windows devices, at least, are going to just give a random MAC address, made-up MAC address, when they connect to a Wi-Fi, instead of their actual MAC address. Because obviously you don't want your device's MAC address to be trackable across networks, right? So you just give a random MAC address whenever they connect. Of course, an attacker can just do that as well. Give a random, give the MAC address of the genuine access point if they want. And you can't tell. So yeah, that's interesting thought, but that doesn't work. Oh, that's a wrong button. Okay, so yeah. Going back to the internet layer. The address resolution protocol doesn't provide authentication. So Eve can just raise a hand whenever anybody is asked for and just say, yeah, that's me. And then people are going to send the data to Eve, and then Eve is going to forward them to the correct MAC address. Essentially, you're just inserting yourself as a man in the middle, or an Eve in the middle in this case, into every traffic that's sent. You just always send ARP responses, get the packet, and then forward it. Of course, there are mitigations to this in operating systems, also to some degree. Like, none of these attacks are like perfect or always gonna work, because there are mitigations in operating systems against this kind of thing, but they're not perfect by a long shot. Like, if you want to target a specific device, it's very hard to differentiate between malicious behavior and genuine behavior. And also, the more verification and validation and checking you add at the lower layers, the more overhead you introduce. And that's generally bad, because the lower layers rely on being fast and lean and very good at their job. And the more authentication you do with these layers, for the edge case of a malicious user being in your network, the more problematic it gets. The harder it gets to, the more overhead you're introducing, and the more you're slowing everything down, which is generally not good in the modern internet where we're sending gigabytes of data per second. So yeah, on layer 2, you can just do SAT stuff and just confuse the switch. On layer 3, you can just confuse the end user by abusing ARP. So wired connection, once again, we are screwed if Eve is connected to our network in many different ways. Let's talk about the internet. This is the interesting bit. So far, we've always talked about, okay, Eve is in our general vicinity. Eve is somewhere around you. Maybe Eve is connected to your network, or Eve is in Wi-Fi range of you, or something like that. Okay, let's assume that not everybody is malicious. I know this is tough for some of you, but let's assume that not everybody's out to get you. So, like, the chances on any given moment of an eavesdropper being near you is comparatively small. Like, it's not zero. If you're walking around the InfoSec campus, it's definitely not zero. There's a whole bunch of eavesdroppers in like this one building. We call it an institute. But generally speaking, on any given moment, the chance of an eavesdropper being near you is relatively speaking low. Enter the internet. Everybody is interconnected. There are lots of bad people on the internet. You may have heard this before. So let's talk the internet. Let's recall, how does the internet work? So IP packets have a destination address and a source address, and they're passed onwards by these devices we'll call routers. And the router just takes this packet, goes, okay, should be going roughly this direction, moves it onwards. The router takes the packet, looks at the header, moves it onwards. Next router gets the packet, should roughly be this direction, moves it onwards. And at some point, hopefully the packet makes its way to the destination. As long as it keeps going in the right direction, eventually it's going to get there. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of these devices called routers along the way that keep getting our data and looking at it. So any router that forwards your packets can, of course, also look at your packets. Should be implied. Like if any router on the internet gets your data, they can see your data. Let's look at an example. So back when we still had offices to go to, I did a traceroute. Traceroute is a really cool tool that lets you see your traffic as it travels across the internet, and see who's handling your traffic. And I did a traceroute to google.com. Common host, thus also a common attack target. Traceroute to google.com. So we have a bunch of hops here, and you can always see on the right you have the IP address. And if there's a reverse DNS entry for the IP address, it's even been resolved. And looking at this, I did a bit of research, and I figured out the networks that we're going through here. So this is obviously being sent from the TOGRADS internal network. So the 10.27 is some internal address. Those of you that are like super recall con to a really excessive degree are going to recall that 10.0, the entire 10-point address space in IP is private address space. So that's an internal address. Then we have the 129.27.200.161. That is part of the public IP4 address space of TOGRADS. Then we have some probably firewall that's refusing to send us an ICMP reply. And then we exit TOGRADS address space. We enter this Econet Austrian education network thing. Q&A entry. One of my colleagues once thought they were being BGP spoofed because they were seeing what random questioner is that an incomplete? Hold on, let me see if I can. No, it's just a half a question. Oh, okay. Okay, one of my colleagues once thought they were. Oh, okay. So one of my colleagues once thought that they were being BGP spoofed because they were seeing 1e100.net as a domain when trace routing to Google. That's not BGP spoofing. I'm gonna talk about that when we get there. So we're in TOGRADS address space, then we're moving to this Econet, this Austrian education network address space, and then we're jumping to a Czech education network. So in the Czech Republic, and we're going for 4 hops through that network, and then suddenly we're in Google's address space. It's really cool, actually. I didn't know that. So effectively, we're going from TOGRADS to this Austria-wide education university network. We're going to this Czech university network, and then we're going to Google. That's our route from TOGRADS to Google. Now, what the questioner in Q&A said is their colleague thought that they were being BGP spoofed because they saw this IP. No. So a given IP address can have many different DNS names. So in this example, for example, we have google.com, which resolves to this IP address, or more likely resolves to a list of IP addresses, then we just pick one for load balancing reasons. And this particular IP address happens to also be uniquely identified as this PRG03S01 in F14. So this is some specific computer in a specific data center, while google.com is just resolving to like probably a list of like 40 different IP addresses, and then we just pick one. The reason for that, of course, being a load balancing. You don't want a single server handling all queries to google.com. That would break very quickly. So this name is like what's entered in DNS as the reverse lookup for this IP address. So DNS works both ways. DNS works in the one direction, translating a name to an IP address. That's the most common use case. And then you also have reverse IP lookups. So that's the other way around, where you enter for a given IP address, you record the DNS, the canonical DNS name for that IP address. And effectively, you just choose one that tends to be unique, that doesn't tend to change. So for example, entering google.com as a reverse IP for this 216.58.201.78 wouldn't make sense, because google.com isn't unique. Google.com resolves to many different IP addresses. Well, assumedly, this PRG03S01 thing is unique. This is a unique identifier for this particular computer in the data center. So that's why this is the reverse lookup. This is not BGP spoofing. We are going to be talking about BGP spoofing in a bit though. So we're going from TOGRADS to these multiple education networks to Google. Cool. So let's think about that. How is the internet interconnected in reality? So in the abstract, in Con, we talked about send packet and then router, magic, destination. That's kind of how we discussed it in Con. So some abstract sequence of routers keeps sending stuff the right way. Okay, so let's talk about that in more detail, because detail is where the devil lies in this case. So the internet is interconnected mostly in 2 different ways. On the one hand, we have the more old-fashioned approach, direct peering. Old-fashioned is probably not entirely accurate. I'm going to make that more nuanced in a second. So direct peering is what the internet used to consist of. Back when the internet was mostly a research network, back during the 70s, early 80s, early days of the internet, you had different universities that had connections to other universities, dedicated data links from one university to the other. And they were interconnected via via network protocols. So you could go multiple hops to this network. But they were still dedicated links from, say, MIT to CERN. Random example. I have no idea if these two were connected, but random example. Or in the modern world, the Czech Research Education Network has a dedicated 1.25 gigabyte per second link to Google. And the Austrian Education Network has a dedicated link to the Czech Research Network. And that's how our trace route happens. We go through this dedicated link from TU Graz to the Austrian Education Network, from the Austrian Education Network to the Czech Education Network, and then from the Czech Education Network to Google. And we're only using these direct links. Very cool. Now the problem is, of course, most ISPs, most home ISPs are not TU Graz. They are not connected to the Austrian Education Network, and they don't have a direct link to Google. So what happens for those? Why is the internet actually global? Fun fact, by the way, this direct peering, I say it's old-fashioned and I say it used to happen this way. It's actually gotten a lot more prevalent recently again. For the simple reason that it guarantees a certain amount of bandwidth to certain servers. This is very popular in online gaming. Online gaming providers pay ISPs so that they set up direct links to the game servers, because it gives customers lower latency and it makes the game more popular. It's essentially pay to win on the internet. So for example, Riot Games does this. They run League of Legends. They pay, or they have contracts with ISPs, so that the ISPs make direct links to their data centers where they run the game servers, so people that those ISP serves get lower latency. And it makes the game more popular, and in exchange, obviously, they have a higher maintenance cost. So yeah, direct peering, seeing a resurgence. But the other kind, the more generic kind of internet stuff is the internet exchange point. So an internet exchange point is just a huge network, essentially, that is connecting many, many, many different ISPs. So for example, I looked up the stats for the German Internet Exchange, DE6. I have no idea how it's actually pronounced, the acronym. And they advertise a 10.4 terabytes per second average bandwidth between 2,400 connected networks, is what they advertise on the website. I have no idea where they get the data from. It's just an example and pretty numbers. So yeah, they advertise that much data between that many networks. Here's a map of what that looks like. So this is illustrating one such network with its various connecting data centers. So all of these data centers, all of these round dots on the map, are connected in one giant network, one giant layer 2 network. And any ISP can connect to any of these points and get data linkage to every other point and every other connected ISP. So you can see why this is attractive, right? This gives you access to many, many, many different networks at a relatively low cost by just connecting to one endpoint. And this, of course, is where our second attacker comes in. Have you wondered why I introduced this agent called Smith and then I never mentioned her again? I did it for the name, of course, but I also did it because she's going to show up again. So this is where Agent Smith comes in. You see, when you have all of this data flowing through very few connections, it is very attractive for anybody who would like a lot of data. So yeah, law enforcement agencies, of course, very much enjoy this infrastructure of very big undersea cables that you can tap. But of course, they would never do that, right? I mean, law enforcement agencies are good. They would never violate user privacy. Or would they? I mean, of course they would. I'm joking, right? Everybody here knows this, right? This is not news anymore. This was from the Snowden leaks in, I think, 2013 or whatever that was, sometime before the end times. So the U.S. government agencies are actively tapping these international undersea cables. But surely they wouldn't in the EU, right? I mean, we have GDPR, we have data privacy laws. Nothing of this kind would ever happen in the EU, right? I mean, you know where this is going, right? You know where this is going. Of course they are. Of course they are. Of course they are. So this exact internet exchange in Germany that I mentioned earlier gets routinely tapped by the German Bundesnachrichtendienst. So yeah, this is the moment where Agent Smith comes in and just completely screws all of us. Like, the moment you're connecting via an undersea cable, law enforcement has your data. Sucks to be you. Yeah, so if law enforcement shows up, we're kind of screwed on the network level. Like, at that point, we're application layer is the only thing that can help us. Okay, let's talk about Eve again. Because obviously, if Smith shows up, then we're screwed. Let's talk about an attacker that does not have the compelling power of police force kicking down your door. So, going back to Con, IP packets are passed onwards by routers. Yeah, we said that. Okay, and now we have BGP. BGP is this wonderful protocol that lets network providers advertise what routes they can serve. So effectively, it's every ISP in the world telling the ISPs they're connected to, oh yes, I am connected to this network. And then every other ISP goes, oh cool, so if I get traffic for this network, I give it to you. Everything nice and dandy. It's a really cool, big, collaborative, distributed, shorted path graph algorithm. For everybody that slept through discrete mathematics, you heard that word there once and then forgot it. So it's a graph algorithm that finds the shortest route to any given network. Everybody collaborates. Wait, everybody collaborates? Huh. Everybody collaborates, eh? Yeah, so what's a network provider again? Who gets to talk on this protocol? Huh. So yeah, BGP kind of implicitly assumes that all connected ISPs are trustworthy to some degree. At least the base protocol does. So the base protocol very much assumes that everybody you're peering with via BGP is trustworthy. To date, there are around 100,000 autonomous system numbers. So ASNs are the sort of kind of member IDs of BGP. If you have an ASN, and you can only get an ASN issued if you're an ISP, and you connect to some other autonomous system, that's why they're called ASNs, autonomous system numbers. If you're an autonomous system, you're an ISP, or a big company, like Google, for example, has an AS number, or Amazon has an AS number. But also lots of ISPs have AS numbers. And if you're connected to another AS, and you're BGP peering with them, then you tell them what networks you connect to, and they tell you what networks they can reach, and then everybody forwards this information to everybody else they're connected to. So like you can see this in this image before, like if Eve gets out of the way, we can see this in this picture. So we have ISP1 who's directly connected to this 73.000/8 network. And then we have ISP2 who gets this information from ISP1 and then says, yep, I have a route to this 73.000/8 network via ISP1. And then ISP3 gets this information and goes, yep, I connect to this 73.000/0 network via ISP2 and then ISP1. And then ISP4 gets this information and goes, yeah, I connect to, etc. So everybody gets the routing information broadcast to them, and everybody is happy until somebody does something evil. So once a route is broadcast to somebody, it is then picked up and forwarded. And more specific routes are preferred. So more specific routes, meaning in this example, we see, for example, the 73.000/8. For all of you that slept through parts of Con, the /8 is a subnet mask. So this essentially means every IP address from 73.000 to 73.255.255.255. So everything that starts with 73 point whatever. So everything that matches this IP address in the first 8 bits, that's what the /8 is for. And now, what our Eve in this scenario is doing is broadcasting a more specific route. So instead of broadcasting the entire /8 address space, the entire 73.000/8, the entire range, Eve is broadcasting a subrange. Eve is broadcasting 73.64.00/10. So this is matching in the first 10 bits. So it's a smaller range. It's more specific. So BGP is going to prefer it. Because that's a way of like saying, I own this entire large address range, except for this one small portion. So BGP also cares a lot about the size of its routing tables. And this is a very useful way of managing the size by allowing you to specify exceptions like this. For example, I own this entire /8, except this /24, which I've delegated, by just broadcasting 2 routes and then having the more specific take precedence, instead of having to suddenly like broadcast a whole lot of /24 routes. Okay, so more specific routes are preferred. Of course, this means that if this broadcast that Eve is sending here happens to be picked up by some ISP and forwarded, then this is bad, right? Because this would then take precedence over the /8 advertisement. Yeah, I mean, of course, this is actually happening. Let's look at an example. This is an actual example from 2018, not that long ago, really. So this IP address range, 205.251.192.0/21. This is Amazon's Route 53 DNS network. So this is a whole cluster of DNS servers hosted by Amazon, where you can have your domain information stored and served in a distributed manner, immune to like DDoS and stuff. Just chop it there, forget about it. It's very nice. So Amazon is AS 16.509. My phone locked itself as well. So Amazon is AS 16.509. And on the 24th of April 2018, this autonomous system 10297 starts announcing this route. Starts announcing a route to 205.251.195.0/24. So this is obviously a more specific sub-range of the above range. So this is a /21, so the last 3 bits of the third byte, so of the 129, the last 3 bits can change and you're still in this range. And one of the possible subnetworks of this is this more specific 195/24. So this is part of this address space that is now being advertised as going via this 10297. So nobody actually knows where AS 10297 got this advertisement from. The guess is like that they had poorly configured BGP services, and that somebody, like some sub ISP or some company network, was accidentally allowed to connect to BGP, to their BGP servers. And they also didn't implement things like BGP filtering, which should, in theory, whitelist what BGP routes you're actually allowed to receive from other people. But they didn't do any of that because ain't nobody got time for that. So AS 10297 starts announcing this route to the wider internet, and it peers with a fairly large ISP, this AS 6939. We're going to see the names on the next slide. I didn't have place in this one. And via this autonomous system, it makes its way to the wider internet. So this now is broadcasting a bogus DNS server range. This is broadcasting a bogus route to the wider internet. So traffic that is going to any DNS servers in this specific range is now being sent to AS 1650. Is being sent to AS 10297 instead of to Amazon. And well, what does it do? Very interestingly. So the reason it got noticed very quickly is that the attackers were actually pretty bad at their job. The problem is that the attackers were actually sending domain doesn't exist replies for most queries. So for most queries, they were just sending NX domain. And what that meant is that a lot of websites suddenly started failing for certain users, because their DNS just wasn't resolving anymore, because their DNS requests were being directed to this fake DNS server, and the fake DNS server was just sending doesn't exist. So certain very big domains were suddenly just not resolving. So this got noticed. People did some investigation, and they figured out there is one domain for which this DNS server was returning an IP address, and that was myetherwallet.com, which, well, some of you are probably familiar with, is a fairly popular online cryptocurrency wallet. And any users of that website were then sent a fake DNS reply directing them to a phishing site hosted on a server in Ukraine. Let's look at that in a picture. So we have the players that we just discussed, and we're going to talk about why this had such widespread impact. Even though the route didn't propagate that far before it was retracted, it had widespread impact. Why? So there's a quite particular constellation of players. So we have on the top right, we have this hopefully unwitting victim AS, Enet Inc. 10297. It's a fairly small ISP and somewhere in America. And it connects mainly with this Hurricane Electric, this fairly big ISP in America on AS 6939. And this ISP peers with Google and Amazon. And now this big ISP gets this, on any normal day, the big ISP just gets this advertisement from Amazon that the Route 53 DNS servers are this way, and it just forwards this information to Google, and it just knows how to get to Amazon. Okay. So on any normal day, if Alice wants to visit myetherwallet.com, what does Alice's computer do? Alice's computer is not going to do DNS queries on its own. Most of the time, Alice's computer is going to send requests to a DNS resolver. For example, Google's DNS resolver, 8844 or 8888, or Cloudflare's, I think 1111 is the one they're using. So most of the time, you're just going to send a query to your DNS server, and the DNS server is going to do all the lookups for you. So in this case, Alice is going to send a request to Google's DNS server, and is going to ask, okay, hi Google, where is myetherwallet.com? I want my bitcoins. Google is going to go, okay, I know the .com domain, and I know that the name server for that domain is registered to be 205.251.195.239. I think this is the actual IP address. I think this is the actual DNS in that case. So, on any normal day, Google is going to send that traffic, and it knows that the Amazon stuff is going via Hurricane Electric. That's the shortest route. So it's going to send this DNS query onward to the Amazon Route 53 servers. Hurricane Electric is going to go, okay, let me look at my routing table. Ah, yes, Amazon Route 53, that way. And it's going to send it to the Amazon AS, and the Amazon AS is going to send it to the actual data center. The actual DNS server from myetherwallet.com is going to respond and say, yep, you can find myetherwallet.com at 54, 129, 146, 38. That was the genuine MyEtherWallet server as of the time I made the slide, assuming nobody was hijacking my DNS traffic. I don't know. So don't use this IP directly. Or if you do, it's not my fault if you lose your bitcoins. So yeah, that's the hopefully genuine MyEtherWallet server. You get that reply from the actual DNS server, and well, then Google says, oh cool, I have the answer for you, Alice. Here's the IP address for myetherwallet.com. Thank you for coming. And then Alice goes, okay, HTTP request to, or HTTPS request, hopefully, to 54.192.146.38. Hello, please send me myetherwallet.com. Everybody is happy. That's how it's supposed to work on any other day. What happens on April 24th? So we have this fake DNS server connected to this malicious network. And somehow this malicious network manages to insert this BGP route into the Enet Inc. BGP routes, which gets broadcasted to Hurricane Electric. And now Hurricane Electric has this sub route, this more specific route, registered as going through Enet, because BGP prefers more specific routes. So instead of So it knows, okay, if I need to get to this /21, this generic range, I go to Amazon. But if I need to go to this more specific range, I actually need to go via eNet. Now this is of course bullshit, but BGP doesn't realize this, and none of the players in this game actually thought to set up BGP filtering. At least Hurricane Electric didn't, and eNet didn't either. Because usually Hurricane Electric's filters should have gone, oh, wait a second. eNet is advertising this IP address range, but they're not supposed to be handling that IP address range. Like, that's not an IP address range delegated to them. So they're not supposed to have that. Just ignore it, or report this to my, raise an alert. They're advertising something they shouldn't be. But they didn't do that. So, yeah, this got entered into the routing table. So what happens when Alice sends this request to Google? The request to Google works just fine. Alice sends her data to Google, and then Google goes, okay, wait a second, I know that 205.251, 195.239 is the name server for the myetherwallet.com domain. And now Google sends a UDP packet, and usually this UDP packet would obviously go to Amazon servers. But the problem, of course, is that Hurricane Electric's routing tables think that it's supposed to go to eNet. And eNet's routing tables think it's supposed to go to this fake DNS server that's somewhere in a malicious network. So this DNS request, this UDP packet, ends up at the network layer just being distributed to the wrong server. And that server is more than happy to send back a completely fake IP address in Ukraine. I made that up, by the way. That IP address is not correct. I couldn't actually find the actual malicious IP address on the internet. But yeah, that's a fake IP address. We send that back, and then Google is like, oh, sure, I got a reply. Hi Alice, it's a that address. So the problem here is the amplifying effect of where the BGP hijack happens. Because it doesn't actually matter if your BGP hijack reaches the actual user. What matters is that your BGP hijack reaches popular DNS resolvers, or at least some popular DNS resolvers, or some of the servers used by popular DNS resolvers. In this particular case, for example, 8844 is of course not a single server. It's distributed worldwide. So there's many different copies of the 8844 server across the globe, and only some of them were affected by this hijack. So some of them were directly connected to Hurricane Electric, and those were returning the wrong results. So it didn't actually hijack the DNS everywhere, just certain resolvers. But still, as long as you can hit certain resolvers, well, you get a wrong IP address back. So what happens when you get a wrong IP address back? Obviously, this is a problem, right? I mean, we don't want everything to just go to random servers. At that point, nobody can trust anybody, right? What are solutions for what we could do here? BGP filtering is the one we already mentioned. This would prevent the imposter advertisement from being picked up in the first place. So this would prevent eNet or Hurricane Electric from forwarding this, from adding it to the routing table. Would probably just catch it very quickly. But of course, not everybody's going to do that because ISPs are companies, and companies only do what's necessary for them. DNSSEC, DNSSEC is a standard for digitally or cryptographically signed DNS information. Essentially, you're pushing a cryptographic signature, or you're just pushing authentication data for your DNS into the upper layer. So, for example, the .com domain would contain information necessary to validate the returned results for myetherwallet.com. And the client would then realize, wait a second, this doesn't match what's in the .com domain, what's recorded there, and would just reject the response. So this would prevent the imposter DNS from sending forged replies. The problem is that people have been saying, oh, DNSSEC is the future. It's gonna happen any day now for the last 10 years, I think. So far, it's been adopted by some small percentage of the internet. Maybe one day we'll all be using digitally signed DNS. Maybe. I'm not getting my hopes up. So HTTPS is the big fix, of course. HTTPS did its job. In this case, the phishing site, this fake MyEther wallet, would have popped up a security warning. So when you went to https://myetherwallet.com, then you would have gotten a warning from your browser saying, oh, this certificate is self-signed, or something of the sort, some sort of HTTPS warning. Problem is, of course, users are very well trained to click past security warnings. And most browsers sadly still let you click past security warnings. So yeah. Okay, so let's recap the lower layers. The lower layers are excellent at reliably delivering data if everybody cooperates. That's what they're designed to do, really. They're designed to be very efficient, very fast. I mean, that's why we can send gigabytes of data. Okay, so we have a quick Q&A about the BGP hijacking. The question is, would it be possible for ENET to send a BGP route withdrawal? To withdraw the BGP route to Amazon? Yes, I mean, that's what happened very quickly. That was caught and then was withdrawn within hours of it being noticed and notified. So it was very quick turnaround time. But of course, a few hours of hijacking a popular crypto wallet can be enough to make a lot of money. I don't think there's actually any number for how much money was made there, or if there is, I have forgotten it. That's on me. But yeah, of course that announcement can be withdrawn and was very quickly withdrawn. But I mean, the damage was already done. That you can only fix it after the fact. We have one more. Actually, let me do this recap thing, and then we're going to talk about the last question. So the recap for lower layers is, yeah, excellent at delivering data reliably, very quickly, very efficiently. If everybody cooperates, very not so excellent in the face of malicious actors. The internet was also not designed with this in mind. Internet has grown out of a research network, or generally speaking, all players were expected to play nice. And a lot of the lower layers crust, that includes also fundamental technologies like DNS. A lot of the crust of the lower layers very much dates back to that era, where the internet was still all players playing nice research network, and not a network where everybody's connected to everybody and some of those people are going to be malicious. The takeaways: you cannot trust that you're talking to the right person. Somebody might be hijacking about BGP right. Somebody might just be connected to your network. You might be connecting via Eve's access point to Flixbus network or whatever. You cannot trust that your data is confidential, of course. The attacker can read your data. You cannot trust that your data is unaltered. You might be talking to the right person, but somebody might be switching stuff around along the way. So you might be just talking to a completely fake person. You might be talking to the right person, but somebody is changing what you're saying. Or you might be talking to the right person, but somebody's just listening in. Those are the three main takeaways of this lecture so far. And now, of course, whose job is it to fix all of this? The application layer. So the application layer is going to fix everything, because everything below doesn't really want to deal with it. Okay, so gonna quickly get to the Q&A, and then we're gonna see if we have the time. Then we're gonna talk about certificate transparency and just certificates in general, because I was told that you guys were not satisfied with the answer you got in the first lectures. Okay, so the Q&A question, I'm very briefly going to talk about this, is what do you think of blockchain? Will this be discussed in the lecture? It's a really cool theoretical concept. It's a really cool research idea. It's really cool that you can do it. But whoever decided to scale it to a global scale is an idiot. That's my very short take on blockchain. Whoever decided that we should burn this much energy just because we don't trust each other is an idiot. That's my take on blockchain. Moving on to certificate transparency, because we are going to have the time. So, recap about HTTPS. You did some of this with Maria in the first few lectures. You type HTTPS online in your browser. You do a DNS lookup for online T. Let's assume that this actually works, or maybe it doesn't, who knows. Then the browser connects to the returned IP address. Maybe this is an imposter in Ukraine. And then the browser indicates that it wants to connect to online because so far it's only it's only connected to an IP address, right? The server might serve like 15 different URLs, and now you're actually telling, okay, I want this particular domain. And then the server sends back a certificate that proves that it is actually the server for online geography. So you now have the certificate. What does this certificate prove exactly? It's some data structure. Okay, let's look at this in the browser. So we have the certificate for online geography that we got back. Okay, subject name looks cool. Okay, issuer name. Issuer name. This is the important part. Issue name, this is the people that actually vouch for this. This is the people that signed the certificate. Why should we trust them? Like, I've never heard about this Vereinigung thing down there. And I also don't even know if these people are who they're claiming to be. Like, even if I trust this corporation or whatever, I don't know them. Like, this might be somebody just putting the name in there that's stopping them. Okay, let's look at the next certificate. So we got a certificate for this as well. Very good. Let's look at the certificate. Okay, so we have the certificate subject name. And yeah, this is the people they're claiming to be. Okay, and the people vouching for them. Okay, the user trust network. Okay, user trust network. Who's that? Let's look at the next certificate. Oh, fun, right? Okay, why do we trust these guys? Okay. Next certificate. Okay, subject name, organization, company. Okay, cool. Issuer name. Wait, that's the same stuff. That's like just the same information. Is the entire internet just built and just trust me, bro? I mean, the thing is, in a way, it kind of is. That's like the depressing part, but we don't have a better solution. Why? So, this is, of course, a root certificate, authority certificate. It's self-signed. These people are just signing the certificate for themselves, and the browser just implicitly says, okay, I trust these guys. And why do we trust them? Well, I'm first going to give you process reasons. And I know that for computer scientists, process and policy reasons are always very boring and very unconvincing. But like in the real world, these actually hold a lot of weight. So getting into a major browser's default trust store is incredibly hard. Like when researching for these slides, I had a read through, okay, I'm lying. I had a skim through the Mozilla Firefox and Google Chrome root store guidelines. Like the requirements that you have to fulfill and prove that you fulfill on a continuous basis to stay in those trust stores. It's like a 45-page document with like incredibly specific hardware requirements and incredibly specific requirements for how you store your key material and who can access your key material, and requiring like hardware limitations on multiple people needing to be there to access the root keys and stuff like that. So like these top level CA certificates, like the true like keys to the kingdom, the long-lived certificates that can sign everything. Not like these boring like G and OV delegate CAs that can just get revoked when something goes wrong. But like the top level ones, like these are like required to pretty much be in cold storage all the time, except for like very, very specific occasions when they're being taken out of cold storage to sign or revoke something. And when they are, there's like specific procedures involved that have to be met. They have to be audited by third parties. They have to get monitored when they get removed from cold storage. There's a lot of long list of security and auditing requirements that you have to prove that you're fulfilling when you get into a trust store, and that you continually have to fulfill. And if you don't, you're very, very quickly going to get removed from browser trust stores. This has changed a lot. So in the early 2000s, 2005s, 2010s, even to some degree, like maybe 2011, 12, 13, I would have very much agreed with you that the internet at some level runs on Trust Me Bro. Because back then, browsers were fairly lax in their CA inclusion policies. They were pretty quick to just say, yeah, screw it, we just include these guys. And also fairly loath to remove CAs. Like you would very often hear arguments like, oh yeah, like they weren't exactly following policy, but it's like a one-off thing. And besides, there's like so many websites that rely on these guys, we can't just boot them. They've gotten a lot better at that. Like browsers actually care a lot more about CAs than they used to. Violations of these policies get you removed from trust stores pretty quickly. And when your business is selling SSL certificates, like that's your entire business as an organization, and your SSL certificates suddenly no longer work. Like you've spent thousands of man hours or people hours into getting all the infrastructure, getting the hardware security modules set up, getting securely generated key material, getting like notarized, audited, that you've generated this properly and that it's secure and nobody has it and you can only use it using these specific technological constraints. All this work, all this money poured into it, so you could finally sell SSL certificates at a profit for like major corporations. And then you get kicked out of a trust store and suddenly you don't have a profit anymore, you don't have a business anymore because your business is worthless. That's a very, 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 very good way to get capitalism to do something good. Is saying, hey, if you don't do it, I'm going to take your money away. And yeah, so companies are actually pretty incentivized to care about security these days, because if they don't, then they don't have a company anymore. But of course, you're all computer scientists, so this doesn't convince you. Of course it doesn't. Let's talk about cryptography. Let's talk about Merkle trees. Merkle trees are a really fun data structure. If you don't care about certificates, these things are also used in cryptocurrencies. This should get you to listen. So a Merkle tree is effectively a binary tree where each node, except the leaf nodes. So the leaf nodes are the bottommost nodes. In this picture, the leaf nodes are what's called the data blocks, is the L1, L2, L3, L4. Every other node of the tree is a hash. So the bottommost nodes, like the two child nodes, get hashed, and the hashes get concatenated and hashed again. So the hash 0 here, the hash 0 depends on the hash 00 and the hash 001. And then the hash 01 depends on L1, and the hash 00 depends on L1, and the hash 01 depends on L2. So the data blocks, the hash block depends on the data block below it, and then each of the hash blocks above depends on the hash blocks below it, like the two hash blocks below it. You can see it in the picture a lot better than I can show you here by making gestures. And so effectively, once you get to the very top of the tree, you have a hash, and this hash, if all of these hashes are cryptographically secure, which they typically are, which we're assuming they are here, if the hashes are chosen so that they're cryptographically secure, then the top hash, the hash at the very top of the Merkle tree, depends on every single data block in the entire tree. Right? If you change a single data block in the tree, this entire hash at the top changes, because you're changing the entire path. And so far so good. What does this help us? So this introduces you to a concept called a cryptographic commitment. And I'm actually not sure if this came up in the previous lectures yet, but if it did, I'm sorry for repeating myself, or us, I guess. So a cryptographic commitment is, well, it's a commitment. It's the server committing, or the one party committing to a certain larger data set without revealing the data set. So in particular, without needing to transfer the data set, because you can imagine that this list of data blocks, if it's just 4 data blocks, it's harmless, right? But imagine that this list of data blocks is ever growing. This list of data blocks is billions of data blocks, trillions of terabytes. You can't store this stuff. You can, of course, store a single hash. Okay. So the server commits to this humongous amount of data by sending you this hash. What does it mean to commit to it? That means the server can't change its mind about what data it's signing. Why? What does that mean? So I can now ask, okay, server, I've seen your commitment, your hash. You can no longer change your mind. Why? Because I can now tell you, okay, server, prove to me that L1 is in your dataset. How does the server do that? Of course, the server could just send me the entire dataset, but remember, we established that the entire dataset is too large. We can't transfer that. It's not practical. What can the server do? The server can send me a proof, a cryptographic proof that L1 is a member. How? So the server sends me every hash along the way. So what hashes do we need to get from L1 to the top hash? So we need, okay, so we hash L1, so we hash this hash 00. We have this hash 00 and we want to go to hash 0. What do we need? The hash 01. So we need the hash next to it in the tree to get to the next node. Okay, so we have this hash 0 now, and to validate this to the top hash, we need hash 1. We need the other side of the tree. Okay, so we have this hash, and if the server just gives us hash 01 and hash 1, then we can recalculate the top hash by just doing the hash operations along the tree, recalculate the top hash, and arrive at the conclusion that, yep, the original L1 was in this data set. What's the upside? Like, what's the advantage here? The amount of data we have to transfer. We don't have to transfer the entire data set. And this is maybe a bit harder to see, but you can get the idea in this 4-item example. It's very hard to fit more of them onto a slide. You need one hash, not for every other item. You need one hash for every level of the tree. Every time you're going up the tree, you just need the neighbor node. You just need the other node that goes into the next hash. Yeah. So you don't need the same number of hashes as you have nodes. You need a number of hashes that logarithmic in the number of nodes. If you have 2 to the 32 nodes in your tree, then your tree has 32 levels. So to get 2 to the 32 items, a proof in a proof of membership in a set of data blocks that has 2 to the 32 items, you need 32 hashes, not 2 to the 32. So this is logarithmic in the number of items, and this is what makes this structure so cool. The server, or the other party, I suppose, commits to the entire data set, this huge data set, with a single hash. And then once we have this commitment and we know that, like, the server can't change his mind, we can then tell the server, okay, prove to me that this particular thing I care about is in your data set. And the server can just send you back the hashes along the way, which is a comparatively minuscule amount of data to the entire data set. And you can still verify that this original proof of commitment, this original hash, proves that the server originally had this data in its data set. Cryptography is really cool. Okay, so let's go back to certificates. So certificate transparency it mandates an append-only log of all issued certificates using Merkle trees. If you say that's just a blockchain, similar. It's not quite the same thing, but yeah, it's a similar concept to a blockchain, if you want. It's an append-only log, so the server can only append things to it, because otherwise otherwise the log wouldn't be consistent. It uses Merkle trees to provide proofs of inclusion. So you can prove that a certain certificate that you see, a certain certificate that the server is sending you, you can have a proof that this certificate is part of the certificate log. And including such a proof is mandatory in all major browsers in 2021. Looks like this. This is, for example, the TU Graz online certificate. You can see that this has 3 different signed certificate timestamps, so there's proofs of inclusion in the certificate. And it's included in these 3 certificate transparency servers. And these certificate transparency logs, the newly added certificates in this log, are then published periodically, and you can check that each time this inclusion happens, it grows the Merkle tree, and you can check that the original commitment still lines up and that you're only appending stuff. So it's something that the server can't change, and certificate authorities must issue these proofs and must include the certificates. Every certificate they sign, they have to also submit to these certificate logs. So essentially what that means is, if you own a domain, you can just subscribe to a certificate transparency monitor, to a tool that just processes these logs every time they update. And as soon as any certificate authority issues a certificate for your domain, you can notice. And this makes it incredibly hard, combined with the process stuff we had earlier, with the you screw up and you lose your business. This adds the second factor, which is, and if you screw up, it's really easy to notice. Because every certificate that is served to browsers needs to be in one of these logs, these public logs, right? And so if you issue a certificate for a domain that isn't, that you're not supposed to be issuing a certificate for, right? Because the actual certificate, like the actual domain owner didn't request it, then they're going to notice because it's in these public logs, and then you're going to get in trouble, right? So that's the second factor of, one hand, if you mess up, you're in trouble, and if you mess up, it's also really easy to get noticed. So it's very good not to mess up if you're a company that enjoys making money, right? So maybe that gives you some trust in X509 certificates. If it doesn't, I can't help you. We don't have a better solution. Like it has to work on everybody's browser as soon as they turn on their computer. Like many of the decentralized solutions are nice, but they require more. I mean that's my personal opinion, but they require more technical finesse than is feasible for most users. So while they're very nice as like tools for nerds, they're not very nice as tools for the average computer user who just turns on their computer and clicks on internet, right? And we need a solution that works for them as well. So yeah, that's the additional stuff that I added because Maria told me you weren't satisfied with certificates. So we're done with that. We have like 2 minutes left in the lecture, and I already went over time a bit, I think. Like we're only supposed to do 60 minutes twice, maybe a little bit more. But yeah, that's certificate transparency. So we talked a little bit about HTTPS. Do we still have questions? I'm assuming we still have questions. So hit me now with your Q&As. We'll still have like 2 or 3 minutes. And then you guys can run off to, I think you have like a practical thing after this, right? I think you do. So yeah, hit me with your questions if you have any, and then we're done. No questions. Awkward. All right. In that case, I'm hoping you enjoyed this lecture. I'm hoping audio quality was fine. I got a thumbs up. That's very nice. Thank you. Thumbs up. Oh, we have a question. Not a question, but you're really enjoying the lecture. See, I like hearing that. Thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying it. It's a first for me. It's very strange to like talk into this camera that's in front of me. Like next week, I'm gonna hang like a teddy bear on the wall or something, so I can talk to the teddy bear. But yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed the lecture. I'm gonna see you guys next week, and we're gonna talk about what happens if you're talking to the wrong server. So we're gonna talk about next week. Next we're gonna talk. Yeah. So far we've said okay, if there's an attacker in the way, then the attacker can hijack everything, and we might be talking to the wrong attacker. Like we might be talking to an attacker. We might be talking to somebody that we're not meant to be talking to. What happens if we talk to the wrong attacker? What happens if we click on the wrong link in an email and open a malicious web page? What happens? What could go wrong? We're gonna find out next week. I will see you all then, and have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.